俺は謎のアイドルプロデューサー辰巳幸太郎様です。これからお前らにはサガを救うためにアイドルをやってもらう。はいどう。お前らの伝説的な感情を生かしてサガを一世風靡さすんじゃーい。
For a long time, zombies and idols were two things I never particularly cared for. It feels weird to admit, but after 12 episodes, Zombieland Saga has given me a whole new outlook for both idols and zombies. It's left quite the impression on me, dethroning Diamond is Unbreakable as my new favorite anime. After having finished the show, I developed a kind of fascination for it, one that I couldn't explain quite clearly. This entire project began with a goal in mind, of figuring out how to put this aforementioned confusion into actual words. Because I enjoy complicating things for no real good reason, I'm going to be taking everything I love about this show, pull it apart from top to bottom for however many minutes this is going to end up taking. As the characters are the core of Zombieland Saga, it wouldn't do the show any justice if I didn't put them in the spotlight. If there was anything being an avid fan of JoJo has taught me, it's that strong characters can become powerful carries of a storyline. Regardless of how well written a story is, if the characters starring in it are poorly written or just plain boring, the story itself will be mediocre at best. It's important for the characters to be written appropriately in relation to the context of the story, unless the entire point of the story is to defy this sort of idea. A realistic concept should be based around characters grounded in reality, while absurd ones, should you guess, would be written around characters that are absurd. I mentioned JoJo because it does a great job of executing upon this specific concept. The outrageous plotline of Stardust Crusaders is centered on Jotaro, a protagonist who mirrors the absurdity of Part 3. On the flip side, the more realistic throughline of Diamond is Unbreakable is characterized with Josuke, a more grounded, relatable protagonist. Zombieland Saga dances along this fine line between being a realistic and an absurdist anime, focused around 7 girls revived as zombies led by the erratic producer/manager Kotaro, who plans to develop them into idols that will quote-unquote save the Saga prefecture. Because of this unusual premise grounded in a relatively reasonable setting, there's a lot of weight on the characters to be written in a way that allows them to take full advantage of their concept to properly execute this idea. Within Zombieland Saga, the characters are designed in a manner that spreads them out evenly across this imaginary spectrum of anime reality, if you will, which gives each of them a strong individual identity, all while maintaining the construct of the group. Thanks to this specific decision, it allows the characters to weave together seamlessly into a more effective cast that balances both ends nicely, rather than having a cast trying to entertain both sides while excelling at neither. For anyone who hasn't watched the actual show yet, the 8 characters in question today are Sakura, Ai, Junko, Saki, Lily, Yugiri, Tai, and Kotaro, all of whom add up to form the collective unit of Franz Shushu. An interesting side note here is that in this show, as a character grows increasingly absurd and detached from reality, which some are more compared to others, the more static they become, meaning they see less change in their overall character. But regardless of how realistic or how much change they actually see, it doesn't make them any less interesting by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm going to be using this time to outline every thought I have on each and every one of the 8. Just as the friendliest of reminders before we start, about 95% of what you're going to be seeing from here on out isn't actually canon, and is just a purely personal interpretation, so don't take this thing as anything more serious than that. Anyways, with all of that junk aside, let's just get right into this thing. As the main character of the entire series and my personal vote for Best Girl, Sakura Minamoto presents one hell of a case study to look at. As expected, she does get a lot of spotlight for being the main character, but her arc tells a backstory far deeper than that of any other characters we see. Because of this, I'm going to split Sakura into 2 different segments. I'm going to go over her dedicated arc much later in a very expanded manner, because it just wouldn't settle right with me if I didn't do it that way. For the time being though, I'll just be doing a super brief discussion on the Sakura we see in the pilot episode, just to make sure we're a little acquainted with our main character here. Our first impression of Sakura gives us a super generic character, one that could be placed into most storylines and do decently. She's your stereotypical anime girl, a little awkward but keeps an optimistic point of view and also happens to dream of becoming an idol as you do. When reincarnated as a zombie, most of these traits disappear, replaced with a ton of uncertainty and anxiety. Sakura is so very nervous for a lot of the early performances, fueled by her belief that the group lacked any real experience. But as the group grows more comfortable and skilled, Sakura's nerves and doubts do settle down and we see her old, brighter self come back. The only scene I really want to go over during this brief analysis is the first show that happens during the pilot episode and what follows after. Much like many of the other girls, Sakura is very skeptical about Kotaro's project, but she does prove to be the one that tries first and the hardest, and there's a lot of interesting changes during this apprehensive phase. The first show at the Death Metal Club was accompanied by nothing but zero confidence, going so far as to Kotaro telling her that everyone, even himself, was expecting them to fail, and that's why it was her job to exceed these expectations. As the other zombies just start going crazy on stage, after a moment of hesitation, Sakura joins in with the rest of them. As they overperform and the audience cheers accordingly, Sakura sees a flashback to a different concert during the entire ordeal. After this event occurs, she begins to practice harder despite everyone else displaying little to no matching levels of motivation. There's a lot that could be unraveled from this sequence of events, or at least some ideas that could be bounced around. Her change in attitude towards practice could be traced to a few different causal points. The most notable idea would be regarding the flashback, and that Sakura hopes for more of these from her past life to be triggered by doing these shows. Another way to think about this is that Sakura's want to become an idol in her past life never left her when she died, and that this dream had subconsciously woken back up during the events of the first episode. Maybe both are correct, maybe neither are, I don't know, although I personally like to consider the second idea to confirm itself over the course of the following episodes. But regardless of what initially drives Sakura, her perseverance eventually inspires the other girls as well, breathing life into the entire project. On a different note, her awkwardness also plays a pretty small part for Sakura's relationships with the other girls. Even though Sakura proves to be unqualified for the job most of the times, she still selflessly volunteers to try and help anyone with struggles they may encounter along the way. Everyone else grows to appreciate the efforts she puts into the project and begins to understand the way Sakura views things, allowing them to better unite into a more cohesive unit under a singular goal. It's not an exaggeration to say that Sakura evolves to become the heart of the group. After all, she's the one who reached out to the girls first, and her motivation to become an idol eventually helped inspire everyone else in one way or another. She's not a leader in terms of experience like Ai and Junko, nor is she a leader in terms of charisma like Saki. However, the group cannot function properly without her, as she's the one who brought everyone together, and we really see this come into effect during her arc. As previously mentioned, I'll be returning to Sakura later on down the line. There's still many things I want to cover, so for now, we'll be setting Best Girl aside to give everyone else some time in the spotlight. As far as all the non-Sakura characters go, I have the most to say about Ai and Junko, and by a large margin when compared to the other 5. For me, the two stand as the most complex dynamic present within the show. For the sake of unnecessary analogy, let's talk about coins. A normal coin has a head and a tail, two opposite faces that cannot exist without the other. While it's pretty extreme to say that Ai and Junko cannot exist without the other, I'm sure you can still get the point I'm trying to get across here. Their similar yet differing backgrounds gives both of them a unique perspective on approaching and contributing to the project, turning Ai and Junko into the two most critical components for the group's overall improvement. Fundamentally speaking, Ai and Junko are different people in almost every way. Ai is much more stubborn and direct and has zero tolerance for any kind of BS thrown her way. Junko, on the other hand, is quite docile, largely keeping to herself and objecting to very few things. Their careers were on two opposite ends of a spectrum, with Junko performing solo while Ai was the leader of a massively popular idol group. The only similarity between them is that they were both veterans of the industry and know what it takes to become successful. While their initial dilemma sprouts from questioning whether the other girls could become great like they once were, it eventually shifts focus to questioning their own qualifications. Junko performed alone and only needed faith in herself to succeed. Ai, on the other hand, had practiced with their group, Iron Frill, for a significant amount of time, so she was able to trust them to succeed. But because their confidence is tested by being thrown into a completely different environment, the newfound challenge begins to cause this confidence to waver. There's a few things we'll be tracking for each of the two as we do this whole thing. For Ai, it'll mostly be her overall faith in the group. For Junko, it'll be her trust in herself as she learns to adjust to both performing in a group and the expectations of a modern idol. And for both of them, it's how they choose to move on from aspects of their past that hold them down in the present day. While a lot of the emphasis on the duo is in episodes 6 and 7, there's a few noteworthy events in episodes 2 and 3 for Ai, so we'll kick things off with her. We learn a lot about Ai and her key traits very early. In episode 2, we get two moments to observe, the first practice and the failed escape. Despite these scenes, especially the first one being super short, they lay down much of the groundwork for Ai for the next few episodes. The practice scene is rather short and simple. Sakura is shown to be the only one practicing, and while everyone else doesn't seem to care, Ai coldly observes Sakura practicing to a point that it makes her uneasy. The escape scene is quite a bit longer, beginning with Junko and Ai getting caught red-handed by Sakura during their attempt. As they wander through the dark city, Ai makes it abundantly clear that she has zero faith in the project. While Junko stays relatively quiet, Ai continues on about how the entire project is frivolous and barrages Sakura with questions as to why she's so invested in this. If there's anything, Ai's actions speak way louder than her actual words. Through the escape scene, we see the girls pass by a set of mirrors where Ai looks into one with a gaze of remorse. At the time of this episode, we don't have any exact guess to how much of her memory has returned. But by looking at her confrontation with Kotaro in episode 3, we can make a pretty safe guess that at least enough has returned to a point where she can remember her past as an idol, and if we were to go out on a limb here, maybe even her time of death. Going by this assumption, this could explain her initial refusal to become an idol again. She was literally struck down in her prime, brought down as she reached the peak of her career. As she was killed in this tragic fashion, it wouldn't be too unreasonable to say that maybe Ai rejects the premise because she believes she'll never be able to reach that same very peak again, and anything below that just doesn't mean anything to her. While we don't have the exact time frame, we can also safely assume that Ai spent an incredible amount of time and dedication into practicing and developing synergy with the rest of her old groupmates of Iron Frill, and it was hard work and a collective goal that brought them their well-deserved respect and success. On the other hand, Kotaro's group of random zombies, one of whom can't even speak properly, is a complete reverse of the situation. No one in the group seems to be thinking on the same wavelength, with everyone but Sakura lacking the drive to succeed as Iron Frill did. Even though Sakura is the only one to be trying early on, Ai's cold stare during the practice scene indicates that she isn't impressed, further confirming her belief. I personally think that it's not specifically zombies as a whole that Ai doesn't believe in, but it's rather the group as a whole in which she has no faith. Because there is this lack of sincerity and unity early on within the girls, it doesn't come as a surprise that the most experienced member of the Seven sees no future for a group that doesn't possess these qualities. A lot of Ai's character comes to light with episode 3, where they attempt to organize a flash mob as a promotion stunt. Much like the previous episode, this one also gives us two scenes to take apart in order to finalize most of Ai's character, Kotaro's confrontation and the attempted flash mob itself. The confrontation begins with Ai leaving during the middle of practice as everyone else struggled with the choreography, with Junko following suit. Kotaro gets in their way and begins possibly one of the most significant conversations in the entire show. He begins with a single statement: a zombie who doesn't do anything is nothing more than a zombie. A frustrated Ai states her two arguments: 1, being an idol isn't as easy as Kotaro thinks, and 2, that zombies can't be idols. As she continues on about her lack of faith in the project, Kotaro questions the authenticity of her statements. When Ai hesitates to answer, he counters her with a rhetorical question: why were you two idols? When this question successfully silences her, he leaves her with one last line, and I quote, "The others are zombies, but they're trying to live. How long do you two intend to just rot?" A lot of Ai's previously held beliefs are challenged during this scene. The first moment to unpack will actually be about halfway through, when Ai hesitates to answer Kotaro. Even though the moment is super brief, it actually marks the beginning of a change of heart for Ai. When discussing episode 2 earlier, I mentioned that I believe the group's lack of visible unity and sincerity to be the primary reason for Ai struggling to put her faith into them. However, through several moments in episode 3, especially in the 2 we're looking at, we see the 5 other girls working better as a unit and genuinely putting a lot of effort into practicing. Despite Ai's claims, the hesitation indicates that she noticed this change, and it may have subconsciously begun to impact the way she perceived the group. Kotaro's statements regarding zombies also plays a big role in Ai's development, as he simply debunks her argument of zombies can't be idols. By claiming that everyone else was becoming more than just a zombie due to their growing dedication, he believes that they can be idols. Furthermore, by questioning why the 2 veterans became idols in the first place, it actually ties together Ai's present with their past in Iron Frill. If there's anything that the show makes clear from the get-go, it's that no one just becomes an idol, and Ai knows this better than anyone else. She didn't become successful overnight. It took her countless weeks and months to get to where she got, and she had to start from presumably nothing, much like the girls in the present. By attempting to give up so early on, she would effectively remain as nothing more than a zombie, which would then mean that her statement of zombies can't become idols would loop back around on her and be saying that she herself couldn't become an idol again. In order to prove this wrong, the one thing she had to do was put her faith in everyone else to recreate the same environment that initially brought her success. To make a quick little note here, make sure to remember Kotaro's line about how a zombie who doesn't do anything is just a zombie, because we're going to be referring to it more times over the course of the video. Compared to the confrontation scene, the flash mob scene is thankfully a lot more straightforward. The scene opens at the location of the flash mob with everyone but Ai and Junko getting ready. The remaining 5 begin the show with Sakura taking the lead as the bystanding duo watch on. The performance goes decently for a short while, with a small audience beginning to gather. However, when Lily trips during the middle of the choreography, Sakura drops everything to check on her. Seeing this, Ai and Junko begin to grow concerned, with Ai actively voicing her disapproval. Despite attempting to reassure everyone, Sakura panics and forgets the lyrics, and the small crowd disperses. Ai and Junko step in here, and with help from the two, they're able to finish the performance. Back at the mansion, Sakura approaches the duo, who thanks them for their help and tells them that she and the other girls promised to work harder so that they could also become idols like Ai and Junko were. It's pretty easy to understand what happens here. Ai has become willing to try again from the very start. It's definitely something that doesn't happen instantaneously, but rather develops gradually over time. Despite their best efforts, it's clear that the group still has a long way to go, and they need somebody with experience to help them along the way as they work towards their goal. This is where the duo, especially Ai, fit into the equation, as they're the ones most qualified to take on that very role. Sakura's words reveal to Ai that everyone looks up to her as a role model of what the ideal idol should be, and this seems to be the last piece of the puzzle that makes everything click inside Ai, as we see this come into effect very clearly. Future practice scenes show Ai taking charge and leading everyone, while also being the one that comes forward first to confront any problems within the group. We can tie together all of this with a nice little bow created by episode 6. By this time, she has fully recovered her memories, and because of this, Ai recites a specific line twice: "I won't be history yet." This line comes after Ai discovers that people remembered her for her tragic death and not her successful career. Ai, during a concert in an outdoor arena, had been struck by lightning during her part and died shortly after due to consequences from the strike. This leads to a major detail about her that comes into play later, that being her fear of lightning. On a side note, it also creates a lot of minor details in her visual design, such as her being entirely wrapped in bandages or her never pointing her finger directly skywards during parts of the choreography. Obviously, for someone like Ai, who had become so determined to become an idol once again, this isn't the kind of legacy she wanted to leave behind. Arguably, you could say that if she had never regained her motivation early on in the show, then she wouldn't have cared about this, but we know Ai better than that at this point. Even though many people would have forgotten about her since her death 10 years prior to this anime's timeframe, Ai hasn't forgotten about it, as silly as that sounds. She knows fully well that she can be much more than just the girl who was struck by lightning. However, given that she still specifically refers to herself as a zombie in this episode, by calling back her previous line of zombies can't be idols, we can say that she doesn't believe she's fully become an idol as of yet. So, by combining this and our previous statements, we can create a finalized claim regarding the root of Ai's motivation and faith in the group. She's not only concerned about the well-being and success of the group, but she also wants to be able to prove to both herself and the world that she's more than merely a zombie or the lightning girl, and that she wants her name to be remembered as being a successful idol. But due to how she refers to herself in episode 6, we can still say that she doesn't believe that she'll reach the same level of stardom as she had previously with Iron Frill, and that there's still more she needs to do if she wants to successfully prove herself and, in a sense, truly be alive. Make sure to remember that last part, because we're going to be revisiting the idea of Ai truly being alive in a little while. We've unraveled Ai for quite a bit now, so let's now turn the script to look at her counterpart Junko. Through a few of the scenes we used to analyze Ai, we saw a few hints of Junko here and there to give us some knowledge of her. In the escape of episode 2, Junko is very much a silent observer to Sakura and Ai's conversation, and near the end of the flash mob of episode 3, she comments on how performing in a group turned out to be better than she had expected. So far, we only know of Junko through the perspective of others, which has made it pretty difficult to get a proper look into her character, that is, until episodes 6 and 7. It's critical to note that Ai plays a massive role in Junko's character construction, mostly by providing contrast with Junko instead of highlighting Junko's individual traits. Within the first few moments of episode 6, we can already tell that Junko is struggling. Saga Rock, the event episodes 6 and 7 build up to, focuses around a new song featuring Junko and Ai, and Junko is clearly having trouble keeping up with the choreography. While Ai says it's fine, Junko doesn't seem convinced by this. Despite Junko's previously stated optimism, it's clear that she's struggling to adapt to her new environment compared to Ai, who's in a more comfortable position as she's done this before. This sets the stage for the 2 episodes that reveals that Junko, like everybody else, looks up to Ai, but maybe for a different reason. Most of the girls, in terms of idol aptitude, are far inferior in comparison to Ai, and it's very possible that the girls have noticed this and thought about it as well. So when Junko is thrown next to Ai, who is in a sense the star of the group at the moment, it's not much of a shock when Junko begins reflecting on her mistakes more seriously. The TLDR of it is that because Ai is the most experienced member of the group, when paired with her, Junko begins to seriously question her confidence and competence with every mistake she makes. This uncertainty comes in even stronger with the scene that follows shortly after. In this scene, the girls are gathered around Ai as they discover the local Saga Rock event. As everyone preemptively excites themselves, Junko lightly chastises them for looking too far ahead and that they should rather take things one step at a time. Ai counters this by saying that rather than trying to perfect everything one thing at a time, fans are actually happier to see a group improve over time, citing her experience in Iron Frill. This only further drives the nail in the coffin of their differences, with their contradicting pasts coming into full force. This scene begins to detail Junko's biggest struggle within the group, that being her mindset. Her career as a solo artist in the 80s gives her a significantly different outlook compared to Ai's perspective as an idol of the 2000s. A quick Google search ended up turning into a Wikipedia article on Japanese idols, and even though the timing is a little off in relation to the anime, I think it still supports the point I want to make. According to the Wikipedia article, during the 70s, idols always appeared perfect in all situations, and beginning with the 90s, idols were viewed as everyday people. This lines up almost perfectly with the situation at hand. The bit about the 70s highlights Junko's view on the case very nicely, and I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that her career was also directly influenced by this point of view. Both Ai's perspective and the bit about the 90s mirror the idea that idols don't need to be perfect, which also fits well with their current environment. Members in a group have the ability to compensate for one another's weaknesses, so it's not necessary to be perfect at all times. However, a solo artist doesn't have the same kind of luxury, so there's more pressure on them to hide or minimize their flaws. Because of this, it can be difficult for Junko to come to terms with that not everything has to be perfect for progress to happen. The difference between Junko's antiquated views and Ai's progressive views reaches its climax with the following scene of the photo op. The photo op begins with Junko hesitantly participating. However, when it becomes her turn, she says that she can't do it, with her claim being that an idol is about dazzling people from up on a stage. Back at the mansion, after Kotaro yells at them for a bit, an argument breaks out between Junko and Ai. Ai begins by pointing out that running out on a job affects not just Junko but the entire group. As Junko repeats that she doesn't want to do it, Ai continues on about how fans need to feel that they, the girls, were within reach. This is where Junko finally responds with their own argument. When a group has worked so hard, fans shouldn't just be able to be on the same level as them, and the group should be treated with respect. As the argument over how they should interact with their fans heats up, Ai states that if they were to continue on, then Junko's mindset would become a problem. This is the moment in the show where things take a significant turn for the worse. So far within the previous two scenes we dismantled, Ai was indirectly involved with Junko's decline in confidence, and this shines as the moment when she becomes a direct contributor. Earlier with Ai, we mentioned that she had a lot of things to prove, so it's understandable when she becomes upset as a potential roadblock presents itself. However, all things considered, Junko's actions are not entirely intentional. From all the episodes we've seen so far, Junko genuinely does want to work hard and be successful alongside everyone else. But this scene is indicative of her being held back by a combination of her own personal and professional views. I'll be going more into her personal stance in a little bit, so for now let's focus on her professional outlook. We pretty much get everything we need to know about her professional viewpoints on the subject matter with this scene. She doesn't view the idol and the fans to be on the same level, and that fans should always be looking up to them, putting the idols atop a metaphorical pedestal of sorts. Therefore, when modern trends dictate that she should be on the same level with her fans, this is a difference she struggles to cope with. The group have worked very hard to win over each and every fan to this point. Junko wants the fans to be able to see and appreciate the hard work that they put in for them, and anticipates respect in return. The photo op is an example of a modern trend undermining this idea, despite her being fully aware of her somewhat dated views. She'd find it difficult to move on from her outlook because that sort of mindset was what allowed her to become an idol in her past life, and moving on would erase what was such a core component on her road to success. With all of this, the photo op adds up to represent the biggest challenge to Junko's confidence both on a professional and personal degree, although the personal part does need to be explained with another scene. The beach scene opens with Sakura catching up to Junko on the beach, prompting a conversation between the two. Junko talks about how during her time, idols never interacted with fans on a personal level, and that whether it was the stage or the screen, there was always a clear boundary between the two. She can't accept fans seeing any imperfections because an idol's job is to give people dreams. As she had once looked up to idols, Junko is motivated by wanting to be someone that others could look up to. The scene closes with Junko saying that not anyone, much less a zombie, can become an idol, and that if her views were in the way of everyone else, then she would leave the group. And with this, we now have a clear look into Junko's personal standpoint on the situation. By wanting to become like her role models during her time alive, Junko has set herself very high expectations, one that she worked very hard to meet. However, it's these self-imposed expectations that both end up helping her and hurting her. They help Junko become motivated once again as she slowly becomes accustomed to the group environment, but they're also the very same thing that prevents her from fully accepting modern idol practices. Junko's definition of an idol's purpose is to give people dreams, which is a pretty lofty task in and of itself. Therefore, to accomplish such a task, it's important that she doesn't falter along the way, because after all, in her eyes, any mistake that she makes may directly translate to damaging someone's dreams. This is why boundaries are so important to her, because the further away the idol is from the fan, the less their flaws will be seen. While in a professional sense, events like the photo op may have belittled her work, in a personal sense it undermined both Junko's expectations of herself and her want to inspire people. But this doesn't mean Junko sees her ideals as an infallible concept. In fact, we can tell it's quite the opposite. She knows her views are behind the times and that to become an idol in this day and age, it requires an embracing of modern trends and ideals. It's so very difficult for her to move on and accept these new ideas because of how pivotal her views were in allowing her to become the idol she once was. Because she followed and met her expectations to a T, she sees them to be vital to becoming a successful star. The clash of old ideals, represented by Junko, and new ideals, represented by Ai, is what brings upon Junko's crisis in this episode, causing her to question her validity as a member of the group. She genuinely does try to bridge this gap between the two, but when she isn't able to follow the expectations of a modern idol, in her mind this becomes chalked up as a failure. The scene isn't just a singular failure that stands out above the rest, but rather a perceived amalgamation of her struggles in adjusting to a completely different environment. With episode 7, we get to see how Junko tackles this issue. If her crisis arose from her inability to adjust to modern trends, the 2 scenes from 7 we'll be looking at are about how Junko learns to cope with these changes, reevaluating her expectations from a new perspective. To accomplish this very task, there's 2 things she needs to do. Firstly, she needs to open her eyes to a new outlook on the disparity between her past and the present. Secondly, she has to come to a conclusion as to how this new viewpoint allows her to realize where she belongs in the group. The 2 scenes that allow these goals to come into fruition are Junko's conversation with Kotaro and the actual Saga Rock concert. After Junko locks herself in a room, the conversation starts with Kotaro kicking down a door, knocking out Junko in the process. Once she recovers, their conversation begins. As Kotaro tries to coax her out of the room, Junko states her confusion about modern idol expectations. Kotaro acknowledges that many things have changed since her death and that with the advent of social media, it only becomes increasingly difficult to keep things private, including the lives of idols. But despite this increase in exposure, idols are still working very hard to this day. He admits that the relationship between the fans and the idols have changed, but not everything has become different as a result of it. Idols are still an inspiration to their fans and they still look up to them as they did 30 years ago. When Junko expresses her understanding of this change but still claims she can't do it, Kotaro simply tells her that she doesn't need to change and that, to quote Kotaro, there are things that make Ai herself and that things that make you, Junko, different. He tells her that, in order to show the world what she can still do as an idol, she needs the other girls beside her. Lastly, he recites the weather for the day of Saga Rock, which includes a thunderstorm, and tells Junko of how Ai died. Before he exits, he leaves her with a gift, that being their stage uniform for the show. The next day, as everyone begins to leave for the show, Junko intercepts the van, claiming that she was the Showa idol Kono Junko. Compared to something like the beach scene, the conversation is much more straightforward, which makes it way easier on both you and me to fully comprehend it. So, obviously, at the beginning, she's still deep within her own inner struggle with no proper answer available to her. The TLDR answer to her struggle is that Junko doesn't need to change to be like her modern groupmates, something she learns only by the very end of the scene. What Kotaro teaches her is that despite her wanting to merge better with the group and modern trends, it's important to fully be aware of what makes her unique or what makes Junko Junko. What this realization highlights for us is that we can now say with confidence that Junko has been approaching the situation from an incorrect perspective. Her crisis came to be because she was focused on the fans, and when she let down her fans at the photo op, this in turn failed her expectations of idols being inspiring figures. However, this conversation tells us that Junko doesn't need to focus on the fans, but rather on becoming the best she can be. She became successful in the past because she worked towards becoming like those she looked up to, not because she worked towards garnering and pleasing fans. By working hard to improve herself, people of her time saw the results of her efforts and became fans as a result of that. 30 years later, as Kotaro mentions, the same still stands true. As long as the idol is working towards becoming the best version of themselves, people will be impressed by the effort and dedication, which turns them into fans that join along their journey of growth and improvement. And in order to succeed and better herself in this manner, Junko needs to become aware of the things that allowed her to achieve this height with the help of the other girls. The gift of the uniform is just a physical manifestation of this idea. Everyone else will be wearing the same outfit as her, but they still ultimately remain as 7 unique characters. It's about becoming better as a group by strengthening the individuals. The mention of the weather and Ai's death further accentuates this idea of stronger individuals making a stronger group. To this point, from Junko's point of view, Ai was the quintessential modern idol, who not only knew what present society demanded of them, but also knew how to effectively operate within a group environment, striving to work towards improving both herself and everyone around her. By revealing the information he did, Kotaro allows Junko to see that despite how strong and confident Ai may seem, she also has struggles within herself that she can't cope with alone. With all the new details we've gleaned from the conversation, we move into the Saga Rock scene, where Junko gets tested to see if she fully realizes the meaning of being strong yet supportive, and where we see the dynamic between Junko and Ai bloom into something significant. Shortly after the girls get to Saga Rock, they see Iron Frill performing on stage and are thoroughly impressed. When the girls take the stage, the music begins with Ai taking the lead. Lightning strikes, causing Ai to flinch, and while she attempts to maintain composure, she ends up panicking on stage. Seeing this, Junko takes over Ai's part, and when the music hits a brief interlude, she extends her hand out to Ai. After she gets back on her feet, they successfully complete their first song, with Lightning striking the stage a second time at the end. With newfound energy, they complete their second song in front of the cheering audience. The episode ends with their performance being published in a local magazine under the caption "Angels Descend at Saga Rock." At this point, the changes Junko has gone through couldn't be any more clear. She's embraced Kotaro's message and learned her lesson, and through Saga Rock, we see this in full force. To completely understand everything within the scene, we need to switch our focus back to Ai. While the lightning is the trigger behind Ai's panic on stage, don't consider it as the cause of her breakdown. To this point, Ai has been diligently working day in and day out to help the group improve, as well as proving herself once more. Obviously, someone in this kind of situation would be under a lot of pressure, as they need to ensure that both the group and she herself doesn't see her mistakes, or make any to begin with. If the group sees those mistakes, then it's possible they slowly lose faith in her as a role model or emulate those mistakes themselves. If she sees her own mistakes, then it challenges her belief that she can once more become an idol. Therefore, I would end up setting a high bar of expectations for herself, and when she begins to see the legacy she was remembered for, it both fuels her fire and casts a shadow over her. This makes Iron Frill's appearance at Saga Rock that much more significant. Her old group has moved on with new members since Ai's death and has remained successful. In everyone's mind, that's what Iron Frill will be remembered for. Their representation of what Ai's legacy could have been, and really should have been. So, in this instance, what does the lightning strike represent? It's all of the pressure on Ai to succeed weighing her down, triggering her breakdown as she begins to crack under it. Saga Rock, as a result, is a combination of her past haunting her on the stage and the self-imposed pressures of the present weighing her down. Speaking of the past conflicting with the present to endanger a journey to success, let's bring Junko back. Junko had to go through a very similar dilemma, albeit with a few differences. The most important difference is that Ai internalized their conflict until the very last moment, with very few people actually understanding the pressure and getting little help as a result. Ai kept all her problems under the surface because of how important it is for her to remain strong and collected as the veteran of the group. The breakdown on the stage is indicative of her struggles getting the better of her. It's made abundantly clear that Ai can't maintain the role of a veteran alone, and that she needs someone to share the burden and lead the group together. Junko's conflict, on the other hand, became public, which enabled her to receive the necessary help to overcome it. She understands the clash between the past and the present better than anyone else in the group, since she's virtually gone through the very same things as Ai. Junko reaching her hand out to Ai is the significant moment in which their dynamic shifts. Previously, Ai was a lone leading veteran, with Junko merely trailing behind and following along. Post-Saga Rock, they stand on equal grounds as strong veterans who have one another's backs to ensure that they can bring the group to its highest potential. You can interpret the second lightning strike in whichever way you want, but there's one I personally like best. To begin, we have to look at it from an Ai-centric perspective, specifically contrasting the importance of lightning in regards to her past and present, as there are several aspects we can point out. Lightning struck to put an abrupt end to her career and give her that undesirable legacy, but it also struck again during her return to the stage. In the past, it burned Ai into the minds of everyone as the girl who fell victim to an untimely tragedy, but in the present, it left Ai burned in everyone's mind as the idol who literally lit up the stage. While she was killed by lightning, she was also, in a sense, brought back to life by it. And that last point, that's the one I want to expand on. Zooming out into a broader scope, let's now look at this in the context of both girls. Take this idea of being shocked back alive and apply it to the two girls, where we can say Saga Rock effectively brought them back to life. Previously, despite their increasing dedication into the project, there were things from both their past and present holding them back. Furthermore, if we rewind a little bit to the conversation of episode 3, Kotaro specifically states that everyone else was trying their damnedest to live by working their hearts out. Put this in relation to Junko and Ai, who, despite their best efforts, were still shackled down by struggles that made them metaphorically dead. The second lightning strike represents them being shocked back to life, being freed of the things that weighed them down, and finally being revived as idols to the stage. And all of this is why I think the Angels Descend on Saga Rock caption at the end is so appropriate. The typical concept of an angel is that when someone dies, they are essentially reborn as an angel in the afterlife. The two girls were killed, and in what is now their afterlife, they were reborn through Saga Rock. And really, that's all there is to the dynamic of Ai and Junko. Despite their backgrounds being so close yet so different, they go through very similar struggles. Whether it's Ai inadvertently starting Junko's self-contemplation and her eventual realization, or Junko literally helping Ai get back on her feet to support her during her lowest moment, each half of the pair needed the other to fully overcome their struggles. They are so different, yet they're only made whole when together, as gay as that sounds. This all adds up to create one of the most interesting character dynamics I've ever seen, one that's made me write almost 10 pages on Yuri bait, and has helped me realize that I should probably move on now. I know that I just spent so many minutes on just Junko and I, but there's definitely more to come, especially once we get to Sakura again. Before we do, we still got well-deserved spotlight to give to the rest of the crew. Unfortunately, this time the light is going to be a little shorter for each character, not because they were uninteresting characters, but more because my focus on the project was elsewhere. So, if anyone's favorite character ends up with not much time dedicated to them, I do apologize in advance because that's definitely on me and not on them. From what I've been able to pick up here and there, I know that Saki has a pretty large fanbase compared to the rest of the girls. She's impulsive and hot-headed, which gets her into some hot water from time to time. On the flip side, she also demonstrates a sense of compassion that helps create some really heartwarming moments. Early on, she's very loud and reckless, being straight up disrespectful in certain parts. However, as the show progresses, she gains a sense of respect that lets her redirect her energy towards the betterment of the group, taking the role of a charismatic leader and motivator. To fully see how this transformation comes about, we need to understand what's important to Saki. She specifically repeats a certain idea over and over throughout the entire series, and it's something she calls guts. Saki directly states that she refuses to respect anyone that doesn't have it, so it's important to know what this really means because the show never actually gives us a clear-cut definition. At first, the idea behind Saki's guts seemed very basic in concept to me, but I hit a complete roadblock when it came to actually trying to define it with words. While I initially looked at it from a purely Saki-oriented point of view, it eventually came to me that I needed to be looking elsewhere. I should have been looking towards those Saki interacts with, especially her old game partner Reiko, and to a much lesser degree, Sakura. For Sakura, we only need to look at the rap battle of episode 2, where she stands up against Saki and takes out her frustrations about Saki's recklessness. Afterwards, Saki had told Sakura that she really did have guts. With this little bit from episode 2, we can outline a very bare-bones definition of guts, the ability for someone to stand up for themselves. However, episode 2 doesn't even come close to exploring this concept like episode 9 does. In episode 9, alongside Saki's backstory, we follow a side plot of her old partner Reiko and her daughter Maria. Since Saki's death over 20 years ago, Reiko had left her gang days behind while Maria acts as the present-day boss of their old gang, Dorami. However, Dorami's heyday as a dominant gang had long since passed, with Maria and 2 of her friends being the last remaining members of the gang. Reiko, on the other hand, had become very apologetic and seemingly lost her passion from her days in the gang. During a showdown between the remnants of Dorami and their rival gang, Korosuke, Saki repeats the stunt that had previously gotten her killed, causing an infuriated Reiko to hit Saki and yell at her for her reckless behavior. Saki then comments to Maria that, over all these years, Reiko hadn't lost her guts. Gathering together the details we saw in episode 9, I think there is definitely a much more clear definition we can now create. While I initially threw around the word confidence for a while, I eventually came to a different definition that I think fits more nicely. As an instinctual person, determination is an important trait to Saki. Her decisions are carried by her impulses, and hesitation isn't a thing she knows. Saki's "I'll never die" motto was the fuel to her fire, giving her the determination to become the naturally born decision maker we all know. From Saki's point of view, even a second of hesitation can lead to a world of differences. Using our 2 examples, let's first consider Sakura. If Sakura hesitated during the midst of the battle, Saki would have been the winner, and she would have never fully given her respect to Sakura, at least not during that time. Sakura earns this respect because of her determination to become an idol, a goal Saki had yet to realize at the time. On a larger scale, think about what would have gone differently had Reiko hesitated to chase after Maria. She wouldn't have interrupted their game of chicken to incidentally buy Saki time to arrive. If Saki never arrives on time, Maria takes on the challenge where she would most likely lose. Dorami permanently disbands, and Reiko's relationship with Maria is likely to continue going downhill. Saki reassures Maria because she sees that Reiko still maintains the very same traits that had earned Saki's respect decades ago, albeit they are pointed in a different direction now. Reiko may have initially impressed Saki through her determination to make Dorami the most powerful gang around, but now she's determined to ensure that no one around her meets the same fate that Saki once did, whether it be her daughter or just a random stranger. The choices Saki makes throughout the show are made because during those moments she believes that it's the best course of action to take and acts on them without hesitating. While her early decisions are made from a selfish perspective, her motivation is redirected to actively look out for the betterment of the group. This, as a result, gives the other girls a lot of confidence in Saki's actions because they know she's working for what's best for everyone. In return, Saki trusts everyone around her to have faith in their decisions to combat their struggles and to become stronger individuals as a whole. As the youngest member of the group, Lily ticks off all the checkboxes that describes the 12-year-old archetype. Optimistic and bubbly, Lily acts in a way that fits the mold of the aforementioned stereotype on a surface level. For most of the early episodes, we don't see any tricks pulled out of the hat when it comes to Lily's characterization, aside from the occasional moment of surprising maturity that adds a little extra to the scene when it does happen. You could say that this was the case because she was an immensely popular child actress and she needed a more adult mindset to help manage the more professional side of her image. But that's not really the point I want to focus on, so let's now move on to the point that I do want to cover, that being the entirety of episode 8. Episode 8 fully explores her backstory, revealing the relationship between Lily and her father as well as her untimely death. After her mother passed away, Lily had grown very close with her father Takeo, who loved watching TV with her. She eventually becomes an actress in order to continue making her father happy, with Takeo taking on a managerial role. Lily finds a lot of success as an actress, but this fame came with its consequences. Her relationship with her father became strained, and Lily had taken a massive physical toll due to exhaustion from overwork. This all builds up to a moment when Lily discovers that she had grown facial hair, causing her to die of mental shock. Takeo finds her body and is overcome with grief, placing all of the blame onto himself. All things considered, of all the deaths we've seen, Lily's death is the most unusual. But despite this, we should consider the context of the situation that brought upon this result. One of the things Lily repeatedly mentions about being a zombie is that she'll never age and will stay 12 forever, at least in the physical sense. This mentality of staying young was revealed to have been carried over from when she was alive, as she's seen reiterating it to her father moments before her death. Therefore, any visible sign of growing older would have clearly drawn out a negative reaction from her. While this motivation behind this mentality is never explained clearly, there's nothing a little theorizing can't try to clarify. It's made plenty clear that her father's happiness was vital to her, but it's possible to say that she didn't understand things from her father's perspective. She could have believed that it wasn't his daughter Lily that made him happy, but rather Lily the celebrity. Further expanding upon the celebrity Lily idea, if she displayed outward signs of aging, such as facial hair, it could result in being signed for less gigs since she was losing her young charm. For all we know, both ideas could be correct, both could be incorrect. Even if both are incorrect, it still highlights what I believe to be a fundamentally correct idea about her, and that her want to stay young was motivated by her father's happiness. This, in conjunction with the aforementioned physical toll on Lily, would have put her in an unhealthy state in more than one way, eventually pushing her to her demise. This kind of presentation places a rather dark twist on arguably the brightest character of the main cast, and I think it works out well in the long run. Despite Lily being displayed as the youngest, her backstory is a grim reminder of what she had been through to get to this point, introducing a complex layer to her character, and lastly serving as another consistent reminder that every girl has faced a tragedy of some sort. We see even more interesting details about Lily when her father begins to appear. After Lily takes note of his appearances and tells everyone of him, they do host a special performance with a song dedicated to Takeo. Regarding this sequence of events, there's two things to take away. Firstly, when she mentions her father to Sakura, Lily also says that she has been actively working on trying to forget about him. Secondly, a few episodes down the line in episode 10, Sakura comments that Lily seemed much happier since her father's reappearance. The initial approach Lily takes when it comes to this situation is the best way to move forward is to not look back. Taking this idea, she tries to fully invest herself in her new path as an idol, and this, to Lily, means that she has to move on from any past attachments. However, once she learns that her father still remembers and mourns for her, this attitude drastically changes. She learns to embrace the things and the people of her past that made her better as a person, and begins to view them as a stepping stone moving forwards rather than a crutch holding her back. And with this, I think that Lily presents one of, if not the best example in the show of using the past to set your future. Despite Lily's past physically clashing the most with her present, we see her be the one who acknowledges and coalesces both parts of her life the most effectively. And even though she doesn't see as much direct development as a handful of other characters do, I think both the lessons she learns and the maturity she handles it with allows her to grow into a fully fledged character and a better version of Lily as a whole, both as an individual and as an idol. It's a genuine shame that Yuri gets so little screen time compared to the rest of the squad because her character concept is so interesting. Of all the backgrounds we know of, Yuri's as a 19th century courtesan is by far the most unique, and her overall character reflects this in a both really charming and creative way. Unfortunately, as she never received a proper arc this season, there's really not that much to talk about, and her being one of the more static characters doesn't really help here either. However, there's still a few interesting observations that can be made about her, and it would honestly just be sad if I were to just let them slide by. So, even if we have less to work with compared to some of the other girls, we'll still dive right in. As the oldest member of the cast, clocking in at 155 chronological years, Yugiri functions as sort of an emotionally mature and stable rock in the group. If you look at the main cast during any moments of crisis, she's always very calm and approaches them with rather evenly minded solutions. However, she's sometimes not the greatest at reading people, as on multiple occasions she lectures someone on a lesson that they've already realized, usually accompanied by a resounding slap to the face. Personally, I think it'd be amusingly appropriate to consider her occasional lapse in analysis to be a byproduct of chronological age, as people in the 19th century would have behaved quite differently in comparison to those of the 21st. The way she would have read people back then, most specifically her clients, wouldn't have carried over well during those 100 and some years. It's funny when you think about how Yugiri is arguably the most open-minded of the 7 girls. She tends to just go along with everything that happens, even with Kotaro's wacky and wild schemes. She briefly mentions in episode 6 that she simply chooses not to question whatever happens around her because getting herself confused does nobody any good. So instead, she uses these opportunities as a learning mechanism to better study the drastic differences between the 2 centuries. I'm sure if any given individual randomly woke up again after 200 years of being dead, they would, at the very least, be quite unsettled. I mean, some of the other girls woke up only after 10 years and had a harder time coming to accept the entire situation compared to how quickly Yugiri did. This could be chalked up as a mature approach to an otherwise peculiar situation, but in the spirit of taking things too far, we may as well continue delving deeper. One interesting fact is that in episode 1, when Kotaro was dramatically introducing everybody to Sakura, he specifically titles Yugiri as the legendary Oiran. According to a combination of Google and the Zombieland Saga wiki, Oirans were entertainers who didn't focus on the physical side of things and more so on general entertainment. I can't say for sure how accurate this identification of an Oiran is because I'm no expert on Japanese culture and history, but regardless, Yugiri would have had her fair share of time being in close proximity to clients. And of course, because she was supposedly very famous during her respective era, she would have had a lot of clients, all of who would have behaved differently. Therefore, to thrive in her arguably unpredictable line of work, she would have had to learn to keep her cool and stay collected during any moments in which this unpredictability gets a little out of hand. This could have easily transferred over 2 centuries later, potentially explaining why Yugiri has a tendency to stay very calm and collected in many situations. There's also a funny side theory that she's basically hopped up on drugs the entire time to cope with this rather massive change in environment, which would not only explain her calm demeanor, but also maybe the reason why we see her pipe so often. These are all wild and wacky things that come as a result of us just not knowing enough about Yugiri, leaving us to invent all sorts of crazy notions about her. Hopefully in the future, we get to see Yugiri receive the proper love she deserves in her own arc, but all we can do for now is cross our fingers and hope for the best. Even though Tai seems to be a big fan favorite, I unfortunately have very little to talk about her, simply because out of the 7 zombies, she's the one we know the least about by an enormous margin. All we know is that Kotaro simply describes her as legendary. As the only one to never fully awaken, Tai displays rather primitive and animalistic behaviors, often seen biting various objects and members, especially Junko, and almost exclusively communicating via grunts. This kind of behavior leads to plenty of comedic moments, with her frequently being in the afterthought of important events that happen during an episode's main throughline. Even with this relatively basic character design, she does display signs of development, especially when we get to the later episodes. Many of the early episodes depict her attacking everything in a very mouth-forward manner, with someone like Sakura having to physically restrain her during these times. However, even though Tai was revealed to have struggled noticeably to learn how to properly follow the choreography and performance, it was shown that Sakura was the one who had the most faith in her. Even though she lacks the ability to vocalize her gratitude, it shines brightly in the final episode when she makes the most number of attempts to help out Sakura. This sort of moment brings a positive twist to her character that rings on a different level compared to the comedic moments that had largely defined Tai to this moment. In my opinion, the most interesting aspect of her character isn't what we know, but rather in what we don't know. Because so little is known about Tai, there's a lot of theories floating around that highlight the potential of her story. One of the theories is that her brain is partly dog, with other variants to this theory stating that she is specifically part of Romero's brain, hence why she's seen interacting with Romero more than others. A different theory claims that Tai was the first zombie to be brought back while the necromancy was being refined, which possibly explains her more traditional zombie-esque behavior and why she is also labeled as number 0. We don't know whether we'll receive a confirmation on any of these theories in the future, but they can be a neat way to view it from a different and potentially more interesting angle. Kotaro's character is simply a paradox given that we can say so much about a character we know very little about. However, despite there being so much character jam-packed into him, he actually sees little to no development through the course of the story and remains relatively static. His matter-of-fact nature is supported by his overly brimming confidence, giving Kotaro the knowledge that Kotaro is always correct, whether or not it's true during that moment. Because of his oozing confidence, he's perfectly fine with treating the girls extremely aggressively without taking their feelings and opinions into even a modicum of consideration. Oftentimes, he'll throw the girls into various different situations as long as it achieves his desired goal, ranging anywhere from open mic nights at death metal clubs to doing ads for a chicken restaurant. Despite his hyperbolic levels of confidence, however, Kotaro proves to be a bit of a dumbass from time to time. He does try to mask his lack of knowledge by simply raising his decibels at anyone that attempts to unveil it, leading to some of the funnier moments the show provides. He also has a really wide set of talents, including, but not limited to, Hollywood-taught makeup skills, beatboxing, and being quite athletic. Topped off by his incredible voice actor, all of these aspects sum up to create one of the most unbelievable characters that I've ever seen, one who is so erratic and impossible to predict that he becomes nothing other than fun to watch. Even though Kotaro is undeniably an asshole during many moments, he's still very much aware of the individual conflicts of the girls, displaying a lot of sensibility and understanding when it comes to managing them. We see multiple scenes throughout the show where someone faces a personal crisis and Kotaro steps in to ease the tension and provide a solution, such as the scene where he converses with Ai and Junko in episodes 3 and 7 respectively. He has a lot of faith in each and every one of them to excel and succeed, explaining why he consistently pushes them to their limits. Kotaro gives the group the potential to exceed expectations and overperform whether or not they had the faith in themselves to begin with. Despite Kotaro easily being the most memorable of the main 8, it's still important to note that the show isn't about him. His moments in the spotlight are usually never as significant or as impactful as the moments the more dynamic characters have. He's oftentimes the one that sets up the girls to have their moment in the spotlight. Don't get me wrong, Kotaro does have important moments that are very defining for the show. However, even during his vital moments, they're important because that moment plays a significant role in the context of other characters' development. Outside of these moments, most of his screen time ultimately has no consequence on himself or other characters. The reason he's so memorable is because he's an incredibly shocking character, so whenever he gets even a second in the spotlight, he takes it to the maximum to create these unbelievable, unforgettable scenes. Going forward into the future, I expect Kotaro's character to remain just as static, and I think it'll be good for the show. His character was written in this hyper-specific way that he produced nothing but positives, and I personally think that maintaining Kotaro in his current form while everyone else develops around him will be a great way to move forwards. So here we finally are, back to Sakura and into the final 3 episodes. What we're about to go through next is the #1 reason that made me want to create this video, and I'm personally indescribably excited to do this. On my script, I have this section titled as Rise Up Again, and for anyone that doesn't know why it's called that, you certainly will by the end. There's just so much packed into the final 3 episodes, and it's going to take quite a bit of time to be able to unravel all of it and to truly gauge how deep everything goes. So, to do this as effectively as I can, this will be structured in a particular way. I'll be summarizing each of the episodes, highlighting all the events I will cover in regards to Sakura. Once the individual episodes have been summarized, I'll proceed to analyze all of the mentioned events in order of the 3 episodes, discussing their significance and offering my perspective. Because the episode summaries will take a while, for anyone that wants to skip them and jump directly into the analysis, I'll leave a timestamp somewhere in the comments or in the description, or maybe even both. So for anyone that wants to skip ahead, feel free to pause the video and find the stamp, and for anyone that wants to stick around, let's begin. Episode 10 starts in the practice room where Sakura notices everyone's recent increase in enthusiasm. Shortly after, Kotaro announces that they'll be having their own concert for the first time, performing in front of an audience of 500 at the Arpino Center. An overexcited Sakura begins to practice on her own, but her solo practice eventually causes her to be out of sync with the rest of the group, which she does initially apologize for. Noticing this, Kotaro sends the girls up into the mountains, hoping that Sakura would learn the value of teamwork and fall back in sync with everyone else. However, while the other girls are focused around getting food, making fire, and doing whatever else they can to improve their time in the mountains, Sakura is exclusively focused on practicing. When the girls create a trap to catch a wild boar, Sakura falls into the trap as the boar approaches and is attacked. While she comes out relatively fine, Sakura lashes out at everyone else, frustrated at their seeming lack of care for the upcoming show. During a later conversation between Yugiri and Kotaro, Kotaro does say that he does have faith in Sakura to learn the value of teamwork, but that, in his words, she won't grow unless she realizes it herself. Having stormed out during the middle of practice due to her continued lack of coordination, Sakura observes the other 6 girls practice from the outside, noticing that they were in perfect unison. After realizing that everyone else had been working together while she worked by herself, she proceeds to apologize again to the group, seeming to have gained a sense of newfound enthusiasm. The next day, when Sakura goes on a run, she is hit by a truck as she leaves the mansion, bringing back her memories from when she was alive in exchange for erasing all of her memories as a zombie. Episode 11 opens with a callback to episode 1, with Sakura roaming the dark halls of the mansion, frightened at the sight of zombies. However, as she runs into the sleeping room, she collapses while uttering, "I don't have what it takes." Later, she wakes up next to Ai, the only person Sakura recognizes in her reverted state. When Ai breaks the news to her that Sakura had died and is now a zombie, she becomes overcome with defeat. When reintroduced to the other girls, Sakura simply tells them to move on without her, and that she doesn't have what it takes to work towards something significant. Without Sakura, the group begins to lose the motivation to practice, with Ai being the one holding the group together. Saki, Junko, Lily, and Yugiri all attempt to convince Sakura to come back, but no one's seeing any real success. Sakura secretly leaves the mansion, claiming that it was for the best, and that she would only ruin everything if she stuck around. From here, we learn about her backstory through an inner monologue. Whether it was the school play, a sports event, or an entrance exam, an unfortunate event out of her control would always occur, causing her to fail. After many failures, Sakura eventually gave up, coming to a conclusion that everything she would attempt would always fail. It all turned around when she heard an interview from Ai, who says,
失敗とか後悔とかを全然ダメなことだと思ってないからですかね。それって絶対次につながることですし、そういうのを全部踏み越えた先に誰にも負けない私がいると思ってるので。
Inspired by these words, Sakura dreams of becoming an idol only to be killed on the way to sending her first submission. Back in real time, Kotaro manages to track down Sakura, who doesn't remember him. Kotaro takes her to an observatory where she tells him of her story. When his attempts to motivate her again fail, he simply tells her that it doesn't matter if Sakura doesn't have what it takes as long as he has what it takes and that he has something big and impressive. The episode closes with Kotaro telling her that he will never abandon her. In episode 12, we begin with the all too familiar cell, with Sakura having returned to the mansion. Despite her clear refusal, Kotaro tells her that she'll still be going on stage with everyone else. While observing practice, she has a flashback of the performances from before the second accident. Throughout the course of the episode, Taya had been making repeated attempts to cheer up Sakura, but when Sakura locks herself up one more time, Taya becomes fed up and is the one to forcefully drag her out. When everybody else, moved by Taya's dedication, vows to help out Sakura, she responds unimpressed, saying everyone was getting excited about something she can't even remember. Yugiri steps up to literally slap some sense into her, chastising Sakura about how she had a responsibility for having motivated them to this point, and that if they were to have a good show without her, they would rather have a bad one with her. Sakura reluctantly agrees to join them once more, with practice revealing that she had retained the choreography through muscle memory. The mirror cracks at the end of practice, but the rest of the girls simply say that they just need to try their best. At this point, it's revealed that Kotaro had actually known Sakura when she was alive and that his real name was Inui. It's also shown that a vicious snowstorm is on course for Saga, expected to arrive on the day of the concert. Through the heavy weather, a massive audience had gathered for the show, filling the venue. The 7 girls take the stage with doubt clouding Sakura's mind. As the building begins to collapse under the snow and the windows shatter, Sakura's doubts begin to confirm themselves as the other 6 girls continue to perform. The venue staff quickly attempt to shut down the show, only for Kotaro to stop them. Eventually, the stage itself collapses, crushing the girls with it, silencing the audience. As Sakura, under the rubble of the stage, is on the verge of giving up one last time, Kotaro begins to clap slowly and the audience follows suit. The other girls stand up from underneath the rubble to finish their parts into the silence, leaving Sakura to finish hers. She finally rises up from the remains of the stage, singing her line. The music comes back online and they finish their song, with Sakura flooded by the return of her old memories. With her memories restored, the group happily accepts her again, and they take to the stage one more time for an encore performance. As they finish the encore, Sakura looks out onto the cheering audience, shouting, The 3 episodes entirely revolve around the countdown to the Arpino concert through the lens of Sakura's changing mentality, beginning with episode 10. The most important thing to note within this episode is Sakura's gradual transition from excitement to anxiety. The primary way in which we can observe this is through her interactions with the other girls. When she first falls out of sync with everyone, she apologizes. However, during the later practice scene where she is still out of rhythm, she lashes out and blames everyone else. Another way to view this is through Sakura's thoughts and actions. Initially, she's unable to contain her excitement and practices individually in order to make sure she can deliver the best performance possible. This motivation later changes when she ends up practicing because nobody else would. Sakura's perspective on the Arpino show turns from delivering the best performance possible to avoiding the worst performance possible. As a result, she falls into a trap where she's too worried about how low she can fall rather than looking up to how high she can reach. But because nobody was able to help her out of this trap, or at least in a reasonable fashion that didn't involve mountains, Sakura ends up becoming increasingly exasperated and anxious about the entire situation, hence why she lashes out. We can also interpret her changing behavior as a cry for help rather than a sign of frustration. If you remember from way back at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that Sakura is extremely selfless, consistently throwing herself at anyone in need despite her questionable qualifications. But whenever she comes across a crisis that concerns herself, as we see in episode 10, she doesn't know quite how to help herself out. Considering this idea, it would easily explain why it took Sakura so long to figure out that the source of the problem was her and not everybody else. We see this multiple times throughout the episode alone, where she becomes determined to fix the problem at hand only to exacerbate the issue because she fails to identify the cause. It's only when she physically removes herself from the problem and becomes an outsider looking in that she realizes the solution, finally returning to her old self. Before moving on to episode 11, let's review what we've identified about Sakura from episode 10 alone. We learn about one of, if not the largest flaw in her character, in that she's unable to help herself simply because she doesn't know how to. And because this flaw has a tendency to pile on top of itself to worsen the issue, it can create a self-perpetuated cycle that becomes very difficult for Sakura to free herself from. Compared to what we've seen throughout the previous 9, episode 10 unveils an entirely different side of Sakura that we've yet to see. This episode becomes more meaningful when you rewatch it for the second or third time, as you'll notice that this episode actually draws a lot of parallels with her actual backstory. Sakura's life was depressing, to say the very least. She tries over and over to pursue a goal and succeed, only to fail every time due to factors out of her control, driving her to give up on everything. When she eventually is motivated again, even that moment is taken away from her, with life dealing one final fatal blow. Episode 10 essentially follows a similar throughline. Sakura tries over and over to succeed at something, it being getting everyone to practice. As she doesn't succeed in doing so after multiple attempts, it blooms into causing her personality to take a drastic turn and requires a solution from outside of herself to be remotivated. But once she is remotivated, it's all taken away from her. You could say that episode 10 was meant as sort of a setup for 11, a hypothesis we can support with some of the ideas we drew out of episode 10. The key trait I highlighted not long ago for Sakura was her inability to help herself. It seems to have been a relatively visible trait when we look at the latter half of her backstory, with her taking an interview from Ai to figure out how to move forwards. This implies that this trait wasn't always present, and it's quite reasonable to say just that. Her repeated tries at success are a clear indicator of her moving on from her previous failures, or at the very least attempting to do so. However, with each new failure, a small shadow of doubt could have been cast over her confidence, which would make it more difficult for her to get back up after each attempt. As she has less and less confidence in herself with each added failure, over time it would degrade her to a point where she just doesn't see the value in getting back up anymore, developing the very trait we see continue on past her death. When Sakura was remotivated and began dreaming of becoming an idol, that was supposed to be the first day of the rest of her life. She was supposed to work hard and follow her dreams, and one day become like a role model who, in a sense, saved her life. But in a cruel stroke of fate, her last vestige of hope is taken away from her when she dies. I really don't think anyone could blame her when she becomes completely defeated, as she remembers once more the vivid details of her failures. But you could also take this idea and put it up to the other girls. How come when they regained their memories, they didn't fall into the same depressed state as Sakura? The answer to this question is rather simple, in that everyone's life was just different. Consider Yugiri, Saki, Junko, Ai, and Lily. When they died, they were arguably at the peak of their careers, and for the latter three, they were following their dreams. Therefore, when the other girls are brought back, even though it takes various amounts of time and motivation, they're soon able to find themselves dedicated towards the project because they know that they've succeeded before and know that they can succeed again. Compare them to Sakura. She had nothing going her way when she was alive, and she was killed shortly after discovering meaning in her otherwise unfortunate life. Therefore, when her memories return, she has no reason to actually try. She's never seen success and doesn't know how it feels, so Sakura can't bring herself to be dedicated when she sees her involvement as an inevitable failure. It literally takes a full reset for her to be able to commit herself to the project, which only speaks of the magnitude of misfortune in Sakura's story. If you take the reset out of the equation and think about it, the pessimistic, defeated Sakura was the Sakura we were supposed to see this entire time. Her memory being reset effectively masks this side of her character from everybody in order to enable Sakura to support those around her and turn everyone into a cohesive unit. Without the reset, the group wouldn't have had anyone to hold it together early on, and Zombieland Saga as we know it wouldn't have happened. The callback to episode 1 at the beginning of episode 11 is super important. What do we see in episode 1? After her terrifying first night as a zombie, we saw Sakura riddled with uncertainty and constantly questioning Kotaro, only to overcome it and begin her journey by the end of the episode. What do we see in episode 11? After her terrifying first night with her regained memories, we saw Sakura riddled with uncertainty and questioning Ai. The significant difference here is that she doesn't overcome this by the end as she had in the first episode. The reason the parallels between the two episodes matters is because they ultimately tell two different stories of two different people. Sakura the zombie, and Sakura as a living person. In the events following episode 1, we see a situation in which Sakura is the only girl with faith in their endeavor, and it's up to her to convince the other 6 girls to join alongside her. Throughout episode 11 and even in 12, we see the complete reverse. The 6 girls are all working hard to be the best they can be, and it's now their job to convince Sakura to join them once more. Go back to the confrontation of episode 3, where Kotaro tells Ai that a zombie who doesn't do anything is nothing more than a zombie. Taking this line, we can further apply it between the contrasts of 1 and 11. In the first episode, Sakura is the only girl to be fully conscious of her decisions, making her the only one that isn't a zombie in a behavioral sense, despite only having memories of being a zombie. In episode 11, Sakura becomes the only one who doesn't try or do anything, which makes her the only one that is a zombie in the metaphorical sense while having her living memories. Think about the 2 endings, which I mentioned to be the biggest difference between the 2 episodes. One ends on a high note, with us looking forward to the events and antics the girls will get into as they learn to bond as a group. 11 gives us an ominous ending with a stare down because we don't have a clear answer on what Sakura will do. The events of episode 1 are the complete opposite of those of 11, and the callback at the beginning of 11 signifies this contrast by drawing our minds back to the first episode only to slowly draw further away from it as the episode progresses. It's the show's way of indicating to us that the story isn't going the way that it should, and to tell us that the Sakura of 11 is an entirely different individual than that of 1. I want to expand more on 11's ending with Kotaro before we get into the final stretch of this venture. Kotaro says a lot of things in this scene which isn't particularly unusual of him. He talks about the lights in the city, comparing them to the fans who were waiting on her to light up the stage. He talks about his big and impressive something and how it doesn't matter if Sakura doesn't have what it takes. And of course, he talks about how he'll never abandon her. Across all of these statements, there's a common trend. None of it is actually about Sakura. It's about her fans, it's about him, and it's about his big and impressive something. None of these are about telling Sakura of how she was such a beloved star or that she was a talented individual who was more than capable enough of being on stage again. As a matter of fact, the only direct statement regarding Sakura we hear from Kotaro in this scene is that what she feels doesn't matter. While he tremendously fails at getting his message across, he's trying to convey something very specific to Sakura. This very specific something is that everyone else around her has the faith in her to succeed. The fans know that she's lit up the stage before and know that she can do it again. Kotaro's big and impressive something is the collective faith that he and the other 6 girls have in her. He'll never abandon her because he knows that she has succeeded after becoming a zombie and wants her to realize that she can and will succeed again. He's trying to tell Sakura to have faith in everyone else because they have faith in her. So, with the observatory scene in mind, we need to take into consideration what the effect of others' faith has on Sakura. The zombie iteration of Sakura only became a stronger individual thanks to everyone's growing faith in her, but the old iteration of Sakura, who we are dealing with right now, has grown unresponsive to and disinterested in the support of others. So, it all comes down to episode 12. With the climax that comes with episode 11's ending, now it's all about how Sakura overcomes her crisis once and for all. The role reversal I briefly mentioned earlier remains in full effect here, and the most important thing to know now is that over the course of the 3 episodes, the purpose of the Arpino concert has entirely changed for everyone else. Initially, it was about delivering the best possible show for the fans, but with the events that happened over the last 2 episodes, the target audience gradually shifted from the fans over to Sakura. The success of the Arpino show would ultimately be the deciding factor in whether or not the defeated Sakura was right the entire time. In order to prove Sakura wrong, everyone around her has been diligently working. Kotaro's ultimatum regarding her participation is just the first of these examples. The girls also take matters into their own hands, with Taya literally dragging Sakura out of the locked room and Yugiri slapping some sense into her. Yugiri's 2 lines here are actually quite significant. Sakura was involved in getting the 6 to see the project in the same way that she did by helping motivate them in various ways. Kotaro being revealed as Inui further pushes this point because it practically confirms that he began this entire endeavor because of her. Even though Sakura is the only one that doesn't know it, she is the core, the heart of the group, and they cannot function without her. Sakura had walked alongside everyone during this entire journey, and it would only be unfair to everyone else if she didn't cross the finish line with them. Yugiri's second line actually signifies a major shift in the episode, as it's finally the moment that Sakura's unwavering negativity falters. We would rather have a bad concert with you than have a good one without you. This simple line contains so many important subtleties. Firstly, it's virtually a continuation of Kotaro's approach from earlier, albeit with a more supportive twist. Yugiri's statement is a claim of the group's collective sentiment of how they're unwilling to step forwards without Sakura. Even though this sounds very obvious, the statement also proves to Sakura that she does genuinely belong with everyone else. To elaborate, let's go back to Junko. One of the key things I highlighted about her was exploring the idea of being both a strong individual and a strong part of the collective unit. There's traits that made her unique and strong as an individual standalone character, but she also possessed traits that allows her to grow closer to the group and help bring everybody else up together as a unit. This idea doesn't apply exclusively to Junko. Sakura's restored memory takes this coherent relationship between the identities of the individual and the member and turns it into a distant duality, placing Sakura into the seat of the individual and placing herself as far away as possible from the member. Aside from her own confidence, one of the other issues she struggles with is that she doesn't believe she belongs here with everybody else, who are, in her mind, so much more talented than she would ever be. Yuguri's line about everybody willing to crash and burn alongside Sakura is the catalyst that finally begins to close the gap between the two distant ideas, not by bringing Sakura to the group, but by taking the group to Sakura. If Yugiri attempted to close the gap by telling her that everything would be okay and that Arpino would be a huge success with her, Sakura would never be convinced. She's far too drenched in her own negativity to see anything involving her having a positive outcome, and Yugiri is aware of this. By telling Sakura the opposite, it represents everybody embracing her misfortune and her self-perceived incompetence, something that Sakura was clearly unaware of. This actually presents a bit of a parallel with episode 1, back when Kotaro had told Sakura that nobody had faith in her to succeed and that's why she should succeed and blow everyone's mind. Yugiri's lines basically convey the same message, albeit maybe not so bluntly and poorly worded. All of this seemingly restores a modicum of faith into Sakura. However, this now poses an interesting question in whether the faith is in herself or in everybody else who believes in her. My answer would be the latter option, just because I'm not entirely sold on Sakura believing in herself just yet, for reasons we've covered already. From this point on, we get a battle of positives and negatives that act as a solid representation of what's going on with this entire situation. Sakura's muscle memory is a portrayal of her desire to be on stage again, even though we know fully well that her mind isn't in the same place that her heart is. Despite her bad luck having been relatively absent since her death, the cracking mirror is a physical manifestation of it, reminding everybody that it's still hovering around her, ready to strike. The snowstorm is the second manifestation of this bad luck, compromising the venue and threatening to ruin the show before it even begins. We see the countless fans showing up to fill up the venue regardless of the poor conditions. The audience portrays the collective faith everybody else has in Sakura to succeed and acts as a precursor of sorts to the most important scene in the trio of episodes. The muscle memory, mirror, snowstorm, and audience act as four pieces of a puzzle that fit together to build the tension that takes us into the ending stretch of the finale, the Arpino concert itself. Clearly, getting into the entire situation, tensions are extremely high. Earlier, I mentioned the idea of the main audience for Arpino changing from the fans to Sakura, and this idea continues to stand strong, represented everywhere from Ai's last-minute encouragement to Saki picking up Sakura's part when she begins to panic on stage. But, as things do, the entire venue collapses despite how hard everyone's support tries to hold it up. The whole situation presents itself as an ultimatum. Will Sakura get back up, or will she stay down, accept her misfortune, and give up? Now, of course, is where the most interesting part of the episode occurs, where Kotaro begins to slowly clap and the fans join alongside him. And with this, I present to you two things. Firstly, the aforementioned idea of Sakura being the audience has fully transferred to the fans by this point. After watching the other 6 girls get back on their feet and waiting on Sakura, the fans, shepherded by Kotaro, attempt to support Sakura by helping her get back up. Secondly, and most importantly, let's talk about heartbeats. There's Kotaro's line that I'm sure everyone's sick of by now about how an inactive zombie is nothing more than a zombie, aka not alive. Once her memory is restored, Sakura had fallen into the trope of the inactive zombie. Under the rubble, defeated, and ready to let go of everything, Sakura is metaphorically dead, lacking the figurative pulse that makes her alive. In a sense, the clapping is analogous to this pulse. A heartbeat is a defining trait when it comes to differentiating between a living or dead person. Kotaro and the audience essentially turn into this pulse for her, attempting to resuscitate her back to life. And, all things considered, they succeed and she gets back up on her feet, ready to live once more. Now, I'm no expert of Japanese language, but thanks to the magic of subtitles and some rudimentary Google translating, we can get a pretty decent understanding of this specific scene and exactly what defines the major turning point in Sakura's character. Back on her feet, Sakura faces the audience, singing the words that echo throughout the entire venue. According to the subtitles and some basic technology, Yomigaere translates to rise up again. And I couldn't tell you 3 more apt words than rise up again to detail this moment for Sakura. the sheer significance of her getting back up can't really be undersold by any stretch of the imagination. She breaks free from the shackles of failure that have held her down for so long, both while she was alive and after her memory was reset. And it's by no means an exaggeration when I say that she couldn't do it all alone, as it took many people to pull her along the way while she was silently and miserably kicking and screaming to let her go. Her decision to stand back up was fueled by the support of everyone around her, but most importantly, she was the one who consciously made the choice to get back up. Sakura was fully aware that she had the option of never picking the mic back up and remaining under the rubble, ending the show at that very moment. This revival of Sakura is indicative of her finally liberating herself from the aforementioned self-perpetuated cycle and moving on to becoming a stronger, more resilient, and just a better individual as a whole, one that is willing to finally let go of her past in order to allow both her and those around her to become who they've wanted to be. For anyone who's got a keen eye, or ear in this instance, there's something interesting about the song choice of episode 12. If you listen to the intro of episode 12's first song carefully, it's actually the very same intro to that of the song they attempted to perform in episode 2. This is, obviously, an intentional detail on the show's part, and for pretty important reasons. Compare and contrast the two performances of 2 and 12. In 2, Sakura was the only one up to the task and everybody else was just doing their own thing on stage. In 12, everybody else was performing at their best while Sakura was distracted by her perceived incompetence. Another detail we can take from this is that it also marks a kind of a transition for everyone involved. Every major concert scene in the show so far that has held major relevance to the characters involved has always featured a new song. The Flash Mob, Saga Rock, Saki's, and Lily's concert all provided us with new songs each time, and Arpino is the first instance in which a major show has repeated a previously performed song. It's equivalent to saying that during the time of the first song, they are stuck in the past for the first time, and maybe for good reason in this case. Sakura's muscle memory plays best into these older performances she's practiced, and it's also likely that they went with that choice to try and force any possible flashbacks, given that they were aware of them happening. Observing the first performance, you can tell things are rather serious and that there's a lot of weight behind the success of it, as indicated by some of their concerned faces and tension present in the air. When everything does end up turning for the positive and they return for the encore, they perform a new song we've yet to hear to close out the finale. By watching the second performance, everybody, including Sakura, is wearing smiles and is genuinely happier being on stage now that everybody is back together once more. There's one final thing I want to go through before wrapping this video up for good, and that's the ending of episode 12 when Sakura faces the audience and the screen fades to white to reveal the title of the episode, Good Morning Again Saga. Throughout the course of the show, thanks to Kotaro's liberal use of the phrase, good morning has actually taken on a bit of a comedic overtone. However, cast your minds all the way back to the ending of the pilot episode titled Good Morning Saga. Episode 1 ends with Sakura entering a room as the girls who have woken are panicking as Tai threatens to attack. Lily, Junko, and Ai are asking for help while Yuri and Saki are asking what's going on. Sakura, in a singular collective response, screams good morning at the top of her lungs. And I'm sure now you see the direction I'm taking this in. There's so many things that can be taken away from this ending that it actually kind of blew my mind when I began analyzing it for this project. Rewind to when I was zoomed in on the contrast between episodes 1 and 11, where I mentioned that the endings of the two stand out as the biggest difference. The ending of 12 is practically a rerun of that of episode 1, as they both reflect a lot of the same things. They both mark the opening of a new chapter for our characters, most obviously for Sakura, especially in the case of 12. And with that, we can even take things a little further when defining exactly what good morning represents. For many of the episodes, the statement is used in the context of Kotaro announcing their next event in the first few minutes. With each and every one of these events, we see Sakura develop. She grows closer with other members, learns to perform like her role models, and becomes the heart of the group as they turn into Saga's regional phenomenon. Taking this, we can, in a weird way, sort of define each of these good mornings as some kind of a developmental checkpoint for Sakura, as we can almost create a timeline of events of the entire show using each instance of the phrase as a notable moment to track her growth. This phrase is noticeably absent for most of episodes 11 and 12 and only comes back just at the very last moment. For most of the last two episodes, the argument can be made that Sakura stays as a static, unchanging character and sees no measurable growth during this time. The final good morning breaks this developmental drought that persisted throughout those episodes as she gets back on her feet and becomes the best version of herself that we've seen. Good Morning Again Saga to Sakura is effectively a moment of victory over her greatest fear as she moves on to accomplish bigger and better things with everyone else's support. Originally, the script was supposed to end here with that last bit about the ending, but a funny realization actually hit me as I was revising the entire thing. The final concert actually has so many similarities with the first ever show back in the death metal club of episode 1. Both times, Sakura doesn't have any faith in the success of the show, but is forced onto the stage regardless, although the second time she does go by her own doubtful volition. Both times, she's the last one to fully commit after going through a mental storm of uncertainty, and both times the show is an absolute success and marks the beginning of a new chapter in the book of her life. In all honesty, I really couldn't have asked for a better ending. We saw the things the 7 girls accomplished when they began this adventure, and we ended on them taking a new step forwards into a brand new journey with a bright future. The biggest difference this time is that while their first chapter had the big storm cloud that was Sakura's past hovering over their main character, the second is now facing clear skies. It's an ending that holds so much importance and excitement for her and everyone else, and is really just so much more meaningful than a stereotypical happy ending for their saga. And yeah, that's the end of the video. A sincere thank you to everyone who stuck around for the entire thing to just listen to me go on for minutes and minutes and minutes. And most importantly, thank you to all of my friends who helped support me through the process of creating this video. There were a lot of hardships during the entire ordeal, and I don't think I would have been able to pull it off if it weren't for the support for all of my friends. I know that the video wasn't amazing in terms of quality or writing in any means, but I genuinely put a lot of work into it, and I hope that, at least it was pretty good for anyone that stuck around to this point. I'm sure you could realize by now that Zombieland Saga is an anime that means an incredible amount to me on both a very surface entertainment level and a more deeper personal level. And I know it's not the greatest anime out there, there are plenty other that are better in so many different aspects, but I don't think I'll ever see another anime that would ever mean more to me than Zombieland Saga. And for anyone that's already seen the show before jumping into this entire video, I hope my opinions and perspective helped provide sort of a new outlook onto Zombieland Saga. And for anyone that hasn't seen the show yet before deciding to watch this entire video, A, I'm sorry for spoiling the entire thing, and B, I hope it does spark some interest in watching the entire show, because I thought it was quite good, if you couldn't tell. Let's see. Okay, lastly, I hope this video is sort of a beginning to a new fun adventure of creating videos for me, because it's something I've wanted to do for a really long time but never actually found the motivation to kind of follow through with it until, Zombieland Saga came along. And, maybe I can make something out of it. And when is the next video gonna be? It could be in a week, it could be in a month, 6 months, a year, 10 years, never. Let's just hope it's not the last few options, and that maybe I can get into a more efficient work rhythm instead of the 5 or 6 months that it took to create this video. So yeah, that's all I have to say now, and once again, I just want to say thank you for anyone that stuck around. Thank you to everyone that supported me. If you haven't seen the show yet, go watch the damn thing, it's pretty good. And yeah, that's all there is gonna be from me. So yeah, take it easy.